In the fluorescent-lit hallways of Riverside East High School, they call him Mr. Morrison, that soft-spoken history teacher who stutters during presentations and can't seem to keep his tie straight. The local troublemakers laugh at his worn tweed jacket and the way he avoids eye contact in the corridors. What they don't know is that those gentle hands once earned him the name Ghost Rider Morgan, the most elusive outlaw the Southwest had ever seen. What they don't realize is that every fumbled lesson plan hides 15 years of outsmarting lawmen across 3 states. And what they'll soon learn is that this reformed criminal isn't here to teach history. He's here to prevent it from repeating itself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning bell at Riverside East High pierced through the autumn air like a distant warning shot. James Morrison adjusted his intentionally crooked tie in the staff bathroom mirror, carefully maintaining the image of a man who never quite learned to dress properly. The facade had served him well for the past 2 years. Another town, another fresh start, another chance to make things right. His reflection showed exactly what he wanted others to see. Graying temples, wire-rimmed glasses slightly askew, and a face that seemed more suited to reading books than surviving shootouts. Through the thin walls, he could hear Tyler Wilson and his crew strutting down the hallway, their boots echoing against the linoleum floors. They were Principal Hayes' newest headache, a gang of seniors who'd been gradually tightening their grip on the school's social hierarchy. James caught fragments of their conversation, something about protection money and new merchandise. The words carried him back to darker days, when he'd run similar operations across the Southwest, before he'd learned the true cost of such business ventures. The bathroom door banged open. James fumbled with his briefcase, spilling papers across the floor in a calculated display of clumsiness. Tyler's gang filtered in, their leather jackets adorned with crude symbols that made James want to laugh. In his previous life, he'd known real outlaws, men whose mere presence could silence a room. These boys were playing at being dangerous, but they were playing a game they didn't understand. The snake patches on their jackets looked like something from a costume shop compared to the real gang insignias he'd once worn. "Well, if it ain't Mr. M," Tyler sneered, crushing one of James's papers under his boot. "Still can't keep your shit together, huh?" James kept his eyes down, his hands deliberately trembling as he gathered his materials. "So sorry, boys. Just trying to get ready for the first period. We're covering the Civil War today. Quite fascinating, actually." "Shut it, old man." Tyler leaned against the sink, pulling out a switchblade and cleaning his nails. The move was theatrical, designed to intimidate. James noticed at least 3 flaws in the boy's grip that would make the weapon easy to disarm. The blade itself was cheap, mall-bought. Nothing like the custom steel he'd once carried across state lines. One of Tyler's lieutenants, a bulk of muscle named Drake, slammed his palm against the wall next to James's head. The sound echoed off the bathroom tiles. 10 years ago, such a telegraphed move would have earned the boy a swift lesson in humility. Now, James flinched exactly as Mr. Morrison should, while Ghost Rider Morgan mentally cataloged 14 different ways to put the young man on the ground. "Listen good," Tyler twirled the blade. "Some of us got a proper business education going on. Better than your boring-ass history lessons, so maybe stop asking questions, yeah?" Through the open door, James caught sight of Marcus Chen hurrying past, head down, a fresh bruise darkening his cheek. The boy had been bright, engaged in class discussions, until about a month ago. Now he sat in the back, jumping at shadows, his sister Lisa watching him with worried eyes. James recognized the signs. He'd seen them before in young recruits being broken into gang life, being molded into soldiers for someone else's war. Something twisted in James's gut, a familiar anger he'd thought long buried. He'd chosen this profession, this school, this chance at redemption for a reason. The same reason that had made him walk away from his old life. the belief that everyone deserves a chance to choose a better path. Even if that path meant leaving. Behind everything you were, everything you'd built, just like he had that rainy night in Tucson when Deputy Wheeler had offered him a choice instead of handcuffs. Of course, James nodded, pushing his glasses up his nose with shaking fingers. My apologies. He gestured to the door, the perfect picture of a cowed academic. Tyler's crew parted, smirking as he scurried past. None of them noticed how his eyes cataloged their positions, their weapons, their hierarchical dynamics. None of them recognized the predator's assessment in his seemingly nervous glances. They saw what everyone saw, another soft teacher in a cheap tweed jacket, harmless as a paperback novel. In the hallway, Dr. Sarah Martinez was helping Marcus Chen to his feet, gathering scattered books. The school counselor's eyes met James's for a moment, and he saw something there. Recognition, perhaps. Not of who he was, but of what he was. Someone wearing a carefully constructed mask. She had that look about her, too, though he couldn't quite place it. The way she moved, always aware of exits, always positioning herself where she could see approaching threats. It was familiar, like looking in a mirror that reflected a different kind of past. The warning bell rang, sending students scurrying to class. James clutched his briefcase close, maintaining his timid shuffle toward room 237. Behind him, Tyler's crew swaggered off to whatever business education they had planned, their laughter echoing down the halls like coyotes sizing up easy prey. Let them swagger, James thought. Let them play at being outlaws. He'd played that game for real, had the scars and the sealed federal records to prove it. More importantly, he knew how it ended, either in prison or on the ground. Unless someone offered another way out, just like Wheeler had done for him. He reached his classroom, took a steadying breath, and opened the door to face another day of pretending to be less than he was. On his desk, a note waited in an unfamiliar hand. The ghost still rides. Time to saddle up. James crumpled the paper, his hand steady for the first time that morning. Whoever had penetrated his cover would soon learn why Ghost Rider Morgan had never been caught. But first, he had a Civil War lesson to teach. And if his students paid attention, they might learn something about how good men sometimes had to fight on the wrong side of history before finding their way home. The last bell of the day echoed through Riverside East's empty corridors like a ghost town's wind. James stood at his classroom window, watching Tyler's crew gather by the rusty chain-link fence. Their business meeting had pulled 5 students out of his afternoon class, all of them showing the same nervous energy he'd seen in Marcus Chen. A knock at his door made him fumble intentionally with his coffee mug. Come in." Dr. Sarah Martinez entered, closing the door behind her with deliberate care. "Mr. Morrison, got a minute to discuss Marcus Chen's grades?" James recognized the tone, casual but charged with meaning. He'd used it himself during countless operations, code words hiding deadly intent. "Of course, though I'm afraid they've been slipping lately." Sarah moved to the window, positioning herself to see both the parking lot and the door. Professional paranoia, James noted. Definitely not just a school counselor. "They found Mike Thompson behind the gym this morning," she said softly. "Broken. Ribs. Concussion. He was planning to quit Tyler's crew." James's hand tightened on his mug, but his voice maintained its nervous tremor. "How terrible! Should we inform Principal Hayes?" "Hayes is scared." Sarah's eyes never left the window. "Security Chief Ramirez has him convinced everything's under control. Meanwhile, I've got 3 more students in my office this week showing signs of drug use. Not just marijuana, something stronger, designer stuff." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Outside, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the fence. James recognized the man who stepped out, Victor Kane, local business owner and school board member. The students straightened as he approached, like soldiers at attention. The gesture sent ice through James's veins. He'd seen that response before, In camps across the border where he'd run operations for men like Kane. "They're recruiting," James muttered, momentarily forgetting his timid persona. "Using the school as a training ground." Sarah turned sharply, studying him with new intensity. "Interesting observation from a history teacher." James fumbled with his glasses. I read a lot of crime statistics. Professional interest, you know. The Civil War and modern gang activities share certain sociological—" "Save it." Sarah's voice carried steel. "I saw how you tracked Tyler's crew in the hallway this morning. Threat assessment, sight lines, tactical positioning. Not exactly standard. Teacher training." For a heartbeat, James considered maintaining his cover. But something in her eyes, that same mirror reflection of a shadowed past, made him reconsider. "Like you tracked the exits when you entered? Made sure to stay out of the security camera's blind spot?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Former Secret Service. Protection detail for federal witnesses. Until a cartel hit went bad in Phoenix." James nodded slowly. "Phoenix. 3 years ago. The Mendoza case? You know it?" "I know someone who helped some of those witnesses disappear. Someone the cartels called El Fantasma." Sarah's breath caught. "The ghost. They never caught him. Said he could vanish like smoke, leave no trace." Her eyes widened. "Ghost Rider Morgan. Son of a—" "James Morrison," he corrected quietly. "That other man, he died in Tucson. Or, at least he was supposed to." Sarah moved away from the window, her posture shifting from professional to predatory. "Then what's he doing teaching history in a high school?" "Trying to keep history from repeating." James watched Kane hand something to Tyler, a small package that disappeared quickly into a backpack. "I've seen operations like this before. Start with the schools, corrupt the kids, build an army of loyal soldiers who don't know any better. By the time anyone notices, it's too late. The drugs? Test runs, probably. Get the kids hooked, make them dependent. Then offer a way out. Join the crew, start dealing instead of buying. Classic cartel playbook." Sarah cursed softly. "Kane's got the school board in his pocket, Ramirez running interference. Even the local cops won't touch him." "But you're still investigating." "It wasn't a question. These are my kids." Sarah's voice carried the same protective fury he'd heard in his own heart. "I watched too many witnesses die because the system failed them. Not again. Not here." James thought of Marcus Chen's bruised face, of Mike Thompson in the hospital. He thought of his own past, of young men and women he'd recruited into a life they couldn't escape. Of Deputy Wheeler, offering him a chance at redemption instead of a pair of handcuffs. "The note on your desk," Sarah said suddenly. "That was me. I need to know if you'd react like a teacher or like a ghost. We could use one. Kane's organization is professional, military grade. The kind of operation that makes people disappear." James removed his glasses, and for the first time since arriving at Riverside East, let his true self show in his eyes. "I'm not that man anymore. Haven't been for years." "No," Sarah agreed. "You're something more dangerous now. A man with nothing left to lose but his second chance." Through the window, James watched Kane's SUV pull away, leaving Tyler's crew to their business. In his mind, he saw Marcus Chen's sister Lisa, watching her brother with desperate worry. Saw Mike Thompson, in a hospital bed, paying the price for wanting out. "I'll need information," he said finally. "Security patterns, staff schedules, delivery routes. Everything you've gathered." Sarah smiled grimly. "Already compiled. There's an old diner on Route 23. Owner's name is Frank Morrison. Seems he has some interesting history with witness protection programs." James allowed himself a small grin. "Good coffee, too. Tonight? 8 o'clock?" He nodded, already settling his harmless teacher mask back into place. "Just 2 colleagues discussing a student's grades." Sarah moved to the door, then paused. "You—" "No, Kane won't go down easily. Man like that, with his connections. Good thing I'm just a simple teacher, James replied, his voice falling back into its nervous stutter. Who would ever suspect me? After she left, James gathered his papers with deliberately unsteady hands. The ghost had sworn never to ride again, but sometimes old debts demanded repayment. Sometimes redemption meant returning to the Shadows One. Last time, he had lesson plans to write, and a war to plan. Frank Morrison's diner sat on the edge of town like a time capsule from a forgotten era. Neon lights buzzed against the desert darkness, casting red and blue shadows across the nearly empty parking lot. James parked his weathered Honda Civic between a rusty pickup and Sarah's more practical Subaru. The position offered clear sightlines in all directions. Old habits die hard. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, carrying the same tone as the one in his classroom. Frank looked up from behind the counter, his weathered face creasing into practiced ignorance. 8 years ago, this man had helped James disappear, had crafted the identity that now taught history to unsuspecting teenagers. Now he was doing the same for others, turning his diner into a way station for those seeking new lives. "Evening, Mr. Morrison," Frank called out, playing his role perfectly. "Usual booth?" Sarah was already there, a manila folder beside her coffee cup. She'd changed from her professional counselor attire into something more tactical, dark clothes, sturdy boots, ready for action if needed. James slid into the booth, maintaining his nervous teacher persona until Frank flipped the diner's sign to closed. "Cameras are looped," Frank announced, bringing over a fresh pot of coffee. "Place is clean. Though I gotta say, James, when I helped set up your cover, teaching wasn't part of the plan. Life's funny that way." James wrapped his hands around the coffee mug, letting his facade drop like a heavy coat. His posture straightened, voice dropping to its natural register. "Sometimes you find purpose in unexpected places." Sarah pushed the folder across the table. "Kane's operation goes deeper than we thought. Frank's been helping me track shipments, personnel movements. It's not just the school. They're using 3 others in the state." James flipped through surveillance photos, shipping manifestos, and student reports. His expert eye caught details others might miss: guard rotations, delivery patterns, hierarchy structures, military precision, private security backgrounds. This isn't just some local gang operation. Kane was Special Forces, Frank added, sliding into the booth beside them. Delta Force, until something went wrong in Afghanistan. Officially, he runs a security consulting firm. Unofficially, he's building an army, James finished, studying a photo of Kane with Tyler's crew. Using kids because they're expendable. Easy to manipulate, hard to trace. Like you used to do? Sarah's question carried no judgment, just understanding. James set down the photo, memories surfacing like old bullets working their way out. I was younger than Tyler when I started. Thought I was so clever, recruiting from high schools. Kids with troubled homes, broken families, easy targets. What changed? Meeting Wheeler. James smiled grimly. Best U.S. Marshal I'd ever encountered. Chased me across 3 states. Could have taken the shot in Tucson, had me dead to rights. Instead, he offered me a choice. Frank refilled their cups. Tom Wheeler? He's the sheriff here now. James's head snapped up. What? Transferred 6 months ago. Keeps asking about you, in his own subtle way. Sarah leaned forward. Does he know about my cover? Probably. Wheeler's too good not to have figured it out. Question is, why hasn't he made a move? The diner's door chimed. Everyone tensed, but it was Lisa Chen, Marcus's sister, her face streaked with tears. Mr. Morrison? I'm sorry I followed you. I didn't know where else to go. It's Marcus, James was already moving, the teacher persona sliding back into place. Lisa, what happened? Kane's men took him, said he needed to prove himself, prove he's loyal. They're making him... She broke down, shoulders shaking. There's this new kid, Mike Thompson, in the hospital. They want Marcus to finish what they started, Sarah finished softly. When? Tonight. Behind the old factory on Wilson Street. Please, you have to help him. He's not like them. He doesn't want to. James shared a look with Sarah. The old factory had been his territory once, years ago. Perfect spot for making examples of people. Get her somewhere safe, he told Frank. Sarah, she was already checking her phone. I can have hospital security. No. James's voice carried the authority of his Ghost Rider days. Kane's got people everywhere. We handle this ourselves. James, Frank warned, if you break cover, now, some things are worth the risk. He turned to Lisa. What time? Midnight. They said if he doesn't show. James nodded. Decision made. Frank, get Lisa to Wheeler. Sarah, we need to move fast. That factory has 2 main entrances, loading dock in the back, broken security cameras on the east side, she finished. At his surprised look, she smiled grimly. I didn't spend 6 months investigating Kane for nothing. They gathered their materials quickly, professional efficiency replacing their civilian covers. As they headed for the door, Frank caught James's arm. Are you sure about this? Everything you built here? James thought of Marcus, of all the young men he'd once led down dark paths, of Wheeler, offering him a chance at redemption. Sometimes building something new means facing your past, even if it costs you everything. Outside, the desert night had turned cold. Sarah checked her weapon. Standard issue, well maintained. Kane will have backup. Good. James reached under his Honda's seat, pulling out a locked case he'd hoped never to open again. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay a custom Colt 45, Ghost Rider's signature weapon. So do we. They took separate cars, maintaining their covers until the last possible moment. James watched Sarah's taillights disappear around the corner, then pulled out his phone. The number he dialed hadn't changed in 8 years. Wheeler. Tom. We need to talk about Victor Kane. A pause, heavy with history. Wondered when you'd call, Ghost. Took you long enough. You knew, all this time? Known since you applied for the teaching job. Figured you had your reasons. Still do? James started his car, the engine's rumble mixing with distant thunder. Some debts can only be paid in full. Factory on Wilson Street? How did you... I'm still the best, James. Just like you're still the ghost. Question is, which one of us gets there first? James smiled, thinking of all the times Wheeler had nearly caught him. Race you there, old man. He ended the call, checked his watch. 1 hour until midnight. Time enough to remember who he used to be. Time enough to make sure Marcus Chen never had to learn the same hard lessons. Ghost Rider was about to teach his most important history lesson yet. The old factory loomed against the storm-threatened sky, its broken windows like empty eye sockets watching the desert night. James parked his Honda half a mile out, ghost quiet, just like in the old days. The familiar weight of the Colt 45 against his ribs brought back memories he'd tried to bury beneath lecture notes and homework assignments. Through his binoculars, he counted 4 vehicles in the factory lot. Tyler's beaten-up Charger, 2 unmarked SUVs, and Kane's signature black Range Rover. Professional security positioned at key points, trying to look casual but betraying their training in their stance and weapon discipline. This wasn't just some gang initiation. Kane was using Marcus's test as cover for something bigger. 6 guards outside, Sarah's voice came through his earpiece, technology Frank had provided. From his witness protection connections, another 2 on the catwalks. They're expecting company. More than they know. James checked his watch. 11:45 p.m. Wheeler's probably already in position. Man never could resist making an entrance. Do you trust him? After everything? James thought back to that rainy night in Tucson. Wheeler's gun trained on his heart. With my life. Yours too. if it comes to that. Movement at the factory's side entrance caught his attention. Tyler's crew dragged someone inside. Marcus Chen, barely conscious, blood staining his Letterman jacket. James's hands tightened on his binoculars. The boy had been softened up first, classic intimidation tactic. He'd used it himself once upon a time. "They're taking him to the main floor," Sarah reported. "Kane just arrived with—" "James, you need to see this." He shifted his position, finding a better angle through the broken windows. Kane strode across the factory floor like he owned it, which he probably did. Behind him came Security Chief Ramirez, and with him, Principal Hayes. James breathed. "Son of a—" The school principal looked terrified, nothing like his usual administrative confidence. Kane's men pushed him roughly toward where Marcus knelt on the concrete floor. Through the scope, James could read Kane's lips. "Time to choose a side, Robert." "They're making Hayes watch." Sarah's voice carried professional rage. "Showing him what happens to people who don't cooperate." Thunder rolled across the desert as James began moving. The storm would provide cover, mask any sounds they made. Just like the old days, when weather had been Ghost Rider's closest ally. "Sarah, get to the catwalk. Wheeler will handle the perimeter. I'm going in through the loading dock." "James." She hesitated. "If this goes bad, your cover. Some things matter more than covers." He thought of Marcus in his classroom, eager to learn, before Kane's operation had gotten its hooks in him. Sometimes you have to become what you were to protect what you are. The first fat drops of rain began to fall as James ghosted through the factory's shadows. His teacher's clothes felt wrong now, too loose, too soft. But that was the point, wasn't it? The man in tweed who stuttered through lectures was just as much a disguise as the legendary Outlaw had been. The truth lay somewhere in between. He reached the loading dock unseen, years of experience guiding his movements. Inside, Kane was still talking, his voice carrying over the growing storm. "Civilization requires order," Kane proclaimed, pacing around Marcus's kneeling form. "Discipline. Things the public school system has forgotten. But we remember, don't we, Hayes? We remember what it means to maintain control." Hayes looked sick. "They're just children, Victor." "They're soldiers," Kane corrected. "Raw material, waiting to be shaped, like young Marcus here. So much potential, such a waste of talent in regular classes. But tonight—" He nodded to Tyler. "Tonight he proves his worth." Tyler dragged a struggling figure into the light. Mike Thompson, somehow taken from the hospital. The boy's face was a mass of bruises, but his eyes still carried defiance. "No," Marcus whispered. "Please, I can't." Kane pressed a gun into Marcus's trembling hands. "Choose, boy. Your future or his." James had seen enough. He clicked his radio twice. The signal. On the catwalk, a shadow moved into position. Outside, the perimeter guards would be finding themselves quietly neutralized by a former U.S. Marshal who'd learned all their tricks. "Quite a lesson plan you got there, Victor." James stepped into the light, his voice carrying none of its usual stammer. "But I think tonight's class is cancelled." Kane spun, genuine surprise crossing his face before professional control took over. "Mr. Morrison, this is a private meeting. Like your private meetings with Tyler's crew? Your special business education program?" James kept moving, drawing attention away from Sarah's position above. "Got to admit, using the school as a recruitment center, that's almost as good as what I used to do." "Almost." Understanding dawned in Kane's eyes. Ghost Rider Morgan, the rumors said you'd gone straight. Did they? Funny thing about rumors. James's hand moved with the liquid speed that had made him legendary. The Colt appeared as if by magic, its barrel unwavering. Sometimes they're true. Kane's men reacted with military precision, weapons appearing from concealed holsters. Tyler's crew scattered for cover, suddenly realizing they were in way over their heads. But Kane just smiled. A ghost, a Fed, and a teacher walk into a factory, he mused. Sounds like the start of a joke. The joke's on you, Victor. Sarah's voice rang from above, her position perfect for covering the whole floor. Federal agents are already moving on your other operations. Wheeler's got the perimeter locked down. It's over. Kane's smile never wavered. Is it? Because from where I stand, I see a disgraced outlaw and a burned federal agent trying to play heroes. Meanwhile, I have a frightened principal ready to testify that he witnessed 2 school employees assaulting respected citizens. After all, his weapon centered on Marcus's head. Who would believe a couple of teachers over a pillar of the community? Thunder crashed overhead as the storm finally broke. Rain drummed on the factory roof like distant gunfire, and in that moment, James Morrison, teacher, outlaw, ghost, made his choice. That's the problem with men like you, Victor, he said. Softly. You never learned the most important lesson in history. Kane raised an eyebrow. And what's that? James's smile was pure Ghost Rider. The thing about ghosts, they never die alone. The factory erupted into chaos as lightning split the sky. James moved like his old namesake, a ghost in the storm shadows. His first shot sending Kane's weapon spinning away. Above, Sarah's covering fire forced the security team into defensive positions, their military training working against them in the cluttered factory space. Tyler, get the boys out! Kane bellowed, diving behind a rusted piece of machinery. Ramirez, deal with our teacher problem! But Tyler's crew was already scrambling for the exits, their teenage bravado shattered by real gunfire. Only Tyler himself hesitated, looking between Kane and the door with a dawning understanding of just how deep he'd gotten himself. Run, James told him, his voice carrying none of its classroom uncertainty. Like I'm teaching you about the Civil War retreat strategies. Now, the boy didn't need to be told twice. James used the distraction to close the distance to Marcus and Mike, keeping low as Ramirez's men tried to establish firing positions. Both students stared at their history teacher with a mixture of fear and awe. Sir, Marcus managed, you're still your teacher, James cut him off, checking Mike's injuries. And tonight's lesson is about choices, like the choice to help your friends instead of hurting them. He pressed his backup piece into Marcus's shaking hands. Cover Mike. Get to the loading dock. Sarah will... A burst of gunfire cut him off, sparks flying from the machinery above their heads. Ramirez was pressing the advantage, trying to pin them down, but he'd forgotten about the catwalk. Sarah's shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him away from his cover. The security chief crashed into a stack of old pallets, cursing in 3 languages James recognized from his border running days. Professional courtesy, Sarah called down. Next one won't be so friendly. James used the moment to get the boys moving, guiding them toward the exit. But Kane's voice carried over the storm, sharp with triumph. Noble sacrifice, Ghost. Just like a teacher. But while you're saving your students, more lightning revealed. Hayes, struggling in Kane's grip, a knife at his throat. Sometimes the faculty needs attention too. James froze. Every instinct from his outlaw days screamed to cut his losses, get the kids clear, let Hayes pay the price for his choices. But he wasn't that man anymore. Ghost Rider might have abandoned a compromised ally, but Mr. Morrison couldn't leave his principal behind. "You're better than this, Victor," he called, mind racing through options. "Using kids as soldiers, threatening teachers. What happened to the Delta Force commander? The man who protected people?" Kane's laugh was bitter. "I protected sheep who got my men killed, fought for a country that threw us away. But here," he gestured around the factory with his free hand, "here, I'm building something real. An army that understands loyalty. Soldiers who know the cost of power. By terrorizing teenagers? Real brave. By teaching them what schools won't. The world isn't fair, Ghost. You knew that once. Every kid we recruit is one less victim, one more survivor." James remembered using similar logic a lifetime ago. Remembered believing it until Wheeler showed him the cost. "There's always a choice, Victor. Is there? Choose then, the principal or the kids." Clock's ticking. But Kane had made a classic villain's mistake. Monologuing. While he ranted about power and survival, he'd forgotten about the storm. About the rain-slick factory floor. About the fact that Hayes was still, at heart, a teacher. The principal drove his elbow back precisely as Sarah's shot shattered the window above them. Glass and rain sprayed down, making Kane flinch. Hayes broke free, showing physical education skills his personnel file hadn't mentioned. James didn't hesitate. His Colt roared once, twice, the shots threading past Hayes to catch Kane in the leg and shoulder. The former Delta Force commander went down hard, but he was still dangerous. His backup weapon appeared as if by magic. Time slowed. James saw Kane's finger tightening on the trigger, saw Hayes in the line of fire. His body moved without conscious thought, decades of instinct taking over. He tackled the principal as Kane's shot cracked past them. Then the factory doors burst. Open, flooding the space with red and blue lights. "Federal agents!" Wheeler's voice boomed through the storm. "Weapons down, hands where we can see them!" Kane's remaining men recognized the tone of absolute authority. Weapons clattered to the ground as tactical teams swarmed the building. Sarah appeared from the catwalk, her federal credentials already out. Through the loading dock, James glimpsed Marcus getting Mike into an ambulance, both boys safe. "Right on time, Tom," James called, helping Hayes to his feet, almost like you were waiting for a cue. Wheeler approached, his badge gleaming in the emergency lights. "Had to give you a chance to play the hero, Ghost, for old time's sake." Kane struggled against the agents cuffing him, his professional mask finally cracking. "You really think this changes anything? There are other schools, other operations. You can't protect them all." "No," James agreed, letting his teacher's demeanor return like a comfortable coat. "But we can teach them to protect themselves." He turned to Hayes, who was watching him with new understanding. "I suppose this means my teaching contract needs review." The principal straightened his ruined tie, a ghost of his old authority returning. "Depends. Think you can keep covering American history? Your Civil War lessons seem particularly effective." "Speaking of lessons," Wheeler interrupted, holding up an evidence bag. Inside, James recognized the drugs they'd been pushing through the school. Kane's little operation was testing these on students, military-grade performance enhancers. Every dose tagged with GPS trackers, building a database of potential recruits. Sarah examined the bag with professional interest. That's why they targeted the athletics programs first, looking for soldiers who could handle the enhancement. Using kids as lab rats, James felt his hands clench. "Just like I used to. Like I helped others do. Difference is, you learned better. Wheeler clasped his shoulder. Found a way to make it right. Outside, the storm was passing. Dawn wouldn't be far behind, bringing with it questions, paperwork, and the harsh light of consequences. But for now, James watched the ambulance pull away, carrying 2 students who'd learned some hard lessons about choices and second chances. Think, the school board will believe all this? Hayes wondered, watching Kane being led away. James smiled, adjusting his crooked tie. History is written by the survivors, Principal Hayes. And sometimes... He shared a look with Sarah, seeing his own path to redemption mirrored in her eyes. Sometimes the best stories are the ones that teach us how to be better than we were. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a final echo of Ghost Rider's return. But it was Mr. Morrison, high school history teacher, who walked out of that factor into the clearing sky. Dawn painted Riverside East High School in shades of gold and shadow as James pulled into his usual parking spot. His Honda looked out of place among the cluster of federal vehicles and local news vans. The events at the factory had barely made the morning news, a routine drug bust, according to the official statement. But rumors spread fast in small towns. The school board had called an emergency meeting for that afternoon. Until then, Principal Hayes had insisted on maintaining normal operations. Our students need stability, he'd said, his voice still shaking slightly from the night's events. They need to see us standing strong. James straightened his tie, crooked as always, but now it felt more like a choice than a disguise. As a cow. He gathered his briefcase. Sarah's car pulled up beside him. "Morning, Mr. Morrison," she called, her counselor's mask firmly in place. Quite a crowd today. Through his classroom window, he could see federal agents posing as maintenance workers, sweeping the building for any remaining traces of Kane's operation. Wheeler had been thorough in the night's cleanup, but organizations like Kane's often left hidden surprises. "Dr. Martinez," James nodded, letting his nervous teacher persona surface, but with subtle differences. No more stuttering, just a quieter strength. "How's Mike Thompson?" "Released from hospital an hour ago." "His mother's keeping him home today." "Marcus." She glanced around before continuing softly. Marcus gave a full statement. Names, dates, everything he knows about Kane's recruitment program. Brave kid. He said his history teacher taught him about moral courage. Standing up when it matters. James smiled slightly. Sounds like a good lesson. They entered the building together, passing the spot where Tyler's crew usually lounged. The gang leader and his inner circle were conspicuously absent, taken into protective custody, according to Wheeler. The rest had scattered like dust in the desert wind. First period was subdued. Students whispered among themselves, sharing fragments of truth and rumor. James caught snippets about gunfire at the old factory, about federal agents and drug busts, about Mr. Morrison's car being seen in the area. He taught his Civil War lesson as planned, but today the material felt different. When he spoke about soldiers making hard choices, about good men fighting on both sides, his words carried new weight. History remembers the big moments, he told his class, setting aside his notes. The battles, the victories, the defeats. But the real changes often happen in smaller choices. One person standing up when it would be easier to look away. One voice speaking truth when lies seem safer. Lisa Chen sat in the front row, dark circles under her eyes betraying a sleepless night. But she held herself straighter now, proud of her brother's courage. Beside her, other students who'd been on the edges of Kane's operation watched James with new understanding. During lunch, Frank Morrison appeared in the cafeteria, wearing a delivery uniform. He sat up in a corner, selling coffee and sandwiches, while his trained eyes cataloged faces and movements. Building a database of his own, James knew, to help track Kane's wider network. "Teacher of the Year and a vigilante ghost," Frank muttered as James passed his counter. "You never did anything halfway, did you?" "Learned from the best." James picked up his coffee, properly this time, no deliberate fumbling. "Any word from Wheeler?" "Kane's not talking, but his accounts are. Money trails leading to 3 other schools in the state. Same pattern: private security contracts, student recruitment, performance-enhancing drugs. Building an army," Sarah added, joining them with her own coffee. "Using schools as training camps." The perfect cover. Who looks too closely at extra security these days? James watched his students, seeing them with both sets of eyes now. The teacher in him noted their potential, their struggles, their hopes. The ghost saw possible recruits, vulnerable targets, kids one bad choice away from paths they couldn't escape. "Kane was right about one thing," he said softly. "The world isn't fair. But that doesn't mean we make it worse." A commotion near the cafeteria doors drew their attention. Diego Ramirez, Security Chief Ramirez's sister and school nurse, was arguing with 2 federal agents. Her voice carried across the room. "My brother made his choices," she was saying. "But these are still my students. I won't let you use them as bait to catch bigger fish." James moved before thinking. His walk. A blend of teacher and ghost. "Is there a problem here?" The agents recognized him from the factory. One started to speak, but Wheeler appeared behind them, his timing perfect as always. "No problem," the sheriff said smoothly. "Just a misunderstanding about medical records. Right, gentlemen?" The agents withdrew, but James caught their meaning. Kane's operation was bigger than one school, one town. The federal response would be equally vast and equally indifferent to collateral damage. "They'll be back," Sarah murmured as they watched Wheeler lead Maria away. Kane was just one piece. His backers, his suppliers. Let them come. James sipped his coffee, feeling the weight of his Colt under his jacket. Not a teacher's accessory, but maybe that was the point. Maybe some lessons required both of his lives. The afternoon sun slanted through classroom windows as James prepared for his next class. On his desk, a note waited in Wheeler's handwriting. "Board meetings a cover. Kane's people want to tie up loose ends. Watch your back, ghost." James read the warning twice, then carefully burned it in his coffee cup. Down the hall, he could hear Sarah talking with students, her voice carrying the same dual nature as his own, protector and warrior, counselor and fed. Let them come, he thought again. Some things were worth breaking cover for. Some lessons had to be taught the hard way. He checked his lesson plans for the afternoon. Civil War guerrilla tactics. How fitting. Time to teach his students about fighting from the shadows, about standing up to stronger forces, about being ghosts in their own right. The bell rang, calling him back to his cover story. But now the cover felt less like a mask and more like armor, protection for the battles still to come. The school board meeting was set for 4 p.m. in the Riverside East Library, but James knew the real decisions had already been made in darker rooms. He watched board members arrive through his classroom window, noting the subtle signs: private security disguised as concerned parents, unmarked cars with tinted windows circling the parking lot. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore, Sarah observed from his doorway. She'd changed into more formal attire, but James spotted the outline of a shoulder holster under her blazer. Subtleties for people who think they can lose. James straightened papers on his desk, a teacher's habit that now served to mask his tactical assessment. Frank counted 12 new faces in the past hour. Professional hitters, not local muscle. 12 that he saw. Sarah closed the door. Wheeler's got 4 teams on standby, but they can't move without proof of hostile intent. School board meetings aren't usually considered combat zones. Usually. James smiled grimly. Good thing. I'm just a nervous history teacher attending a routine administrative review. James? Sarah's voice carried genuine concern. These aren't street thugs or local gangsters. Kane's backers want to tie up loose ends. I know. He checked his watch. 30 minutes until the meeting. Question is, why do it here? Why? Not just arrange an accident on my drive home. Because it's not just about you anymore. Maria Ramirez slipped into the classroom, her nurse's uniform exchanged for civilian clothes. It's about sending a message. My brother talked this morning. Told me everything. Kane's operation. It's in dozens of schools across 3 states. They can't let teachers thinking about standing up get any ideas. James absorbed this, thinking like both predator and protector. How many board members are compromised? Least half, Maria confirmed. The rest are too scared to fight back. After what happened to the last superintendent who asked questions. Sarah's phone buzzed. A message from Wheeler. Her face hardened as she read it. Kane's being transferred tonight. Federal marshals. Maximum security. His people want to make sure there are no witnesses left to testify. Starting with the troublesome teacher who exposed them. James nodded, pieces falling into place. The board meeting's a kill box. Get everyone who knows too much in one place. Mr. Morrison? A student's voice interrupted from the hallway, Lisa Chen carrying a stack of books. Sorry, I know you're busy, but I wanted to return these before the meeting. The ones about resistance movements and guerrilla warfare. They really helped Marcus understand. James met Sarah's eyes, seeing his own realization mirrored there. Kane's people wouldn't just target the adults. Any student who knew too much, who might talk later. Lisa, he said carefully, where's your brother now? Computer lab. He's finishing his statement for the police, like Sheriff Wheeler asked. Michael's with him, and some other kids who want to come forward about the drug program. Perfect targets, all in one place. James checked his phone. No signal. They were already blocking communications. Dr. Martinez, he raised his voice slightly, falling into his teacher persona. Would you mind escorting Lisa to the computer lab? I believe several students needed your counseling expertise. Sarah caught his meaning immediately. Of course. Lisa, let's make sure everyone has the support they need. Maria watched them leave, understanding darkening her features. The meeting's not the target. It's a distraction. Classic misdirection. James opened his bottom desk drawer where his Colt waited beneath teaching materials. Get to Frank. Tell him to watch the exits. Nobody leaves until Wheeler gives the all clear. What about you? James straightened his perpetually crooked tie, but his movements now carried lethal grace. I've got a board meeting to attend. Time to give my performance review. The library had been arranged like a courtroom, with the board seated at a long table and chairs set up for an audience. James counted 8 private security personnel trying to look like concerned citizens. Principal Hayes sat alone at a small table, his posture screaming trapped animal. Board Chairman Richard Maxwell, a man James had never trusted, called the meeting to order with practiced authority. Given recent events, we're here to discuss the continued employment of certain staff members whose actions have disrupted the educational environment. James tuned out the bureaucratic doublespeak, focusing instead on the subtle movements around the room. Two men by the windows, coordinating. Through hand signals. Another near the fire exit, hand suspiciously close to his jacket. All positioning themselves for clear shots. His phone vibrated. A text from Sarah. Computer lab secure. Wheeler's people moving in. Waiting on your signal. James thought of his students in the lab, brave enough to stand up to tell the truth. Thought of Marcus Chen choosing to break free. Of Tyler Wilson running from a life of violence. Of all the young souls he'd once led into darkness, and all the ones he now had a chance to lead toward light. Maxwell was still talking, something about regrettable necessity and maintaining order. But James saw the signal pass between security men, saw hands moving toward weapons, saw his own past and present converging in one critical moment. Time. To teach one final lesson about history and choices. Mr. Morrison. Maxwell's voice carried false concern. Do you have anything to say in your defense? James stood slowly, letting his teacher's nervousness fall away like an old coat. When he spoke, his voice carried echoes of desert nights and ghost stories that made hard men tremble. Actually, Mr. Chairman, I thought we might discuss extra credit opportunities. I hear some of your associates could use a refresher course in American history, particularly the parts about justice catching up to everyone eventually. The first gunman moved, but Ghost Rider Morgan was already in motion, ready to write a new chapter in the violent history of redemption. The first shot shattered the library's false peace. James was already moving, his teacher's clumsiness transformed into liquid grace as he flipped the heavy oak table. Principal Hayes dove for cover as bullets splintered wood where they'd been standing moments before. Active shooters in the library. James's voice carried through his concealed radio, giving Wheeler's teams the signal they needed. Board meeting was a setup. Two of Kane's men rushed him from different angles, their movements betraying military training. But they'd trained. For conventional warfare, not for fighting ghosts. James slid between them like smoke, using their own momentum to send them crashing into each other. Mr. Morrison, Hayes called out in shock, watching his supposedly timid history teacher disarm a professional hitman with terrifying efficiency. What in God's name? Long story, Robert. James secured the fallen weapon, his muscle memory returning like an old friend. Short version, I wasn't always a teacher. Through the library windows, he caught glimpses of chaos erupting across campus. Wheeler's teams engaged Kane's backup forces, Sarah and Frank protecting the computer lab where students were barricaded. But the real threat was here, in this room, where board chairman Maxwell was calmly pulling a custom pistol from his briefcase. Ghost Rider Morgan, Maxwell said, his corporate mask finally dropping. Kane told us you'd gone soft. Become a real teacher. I didn't believe it until I saw you fumbling with chalk, playing the nervous academic. People change, Richard. James kept moving, using the library's architecture for cover. Something you might want to consider before this gets worse. Maxwell's laugh was cold. Worse? You exposed our operation, cost us millions in product and infrastructure. Kane's arrest compromised 3 state networks. And for what? To protect some worthless kids? Those kids are the future, Hayes spoke up, finding his courage. Not soldiers in your private army. They're resources, Maxwell corrected, signaling his remaining men to spread out. Raw material for a new kind of warfare. Kane understood. That. Why do you think we put him in charge of recruitment, a whole generation of enhanced soldiers, loyal to us, trained in plain sight? James counted positions, calculated angles. 4 gunmen left, plus Maxwell. The library had too many windows, too many sight lines. He needed to end this fast. "You're right about one thing," he said, letting his voice carry. "I did go soft. Started caring about actually teaching, making a difference." He caught a glimpse of movement outside, Wheeler's people getting into position. "Funny thing about teaching history, though. Save the lesson plan," Maxwell snapped. "You're outnumbered, Ghost. Times change. Legends die." "Times do change," James agreed. Then, he smiled. The same smile that had once made cartel bosses nervous. "But some lessons are eternal, like the one about pride coming before a fall." He threw his confiscated weapon high, the arc drawing everyone's attention. In that split second of distraction, James became the Ghost again. 2 of Maxwell's men went down before they realized he'd moved. A third found himself disarmed and unconscious between one heartbeat and the next. Maxwell fired, but James was already gone, disappearing behind shelves like a shadow at high noon. The board chairman's professional calm cracked slightly. "You beata can't save them all, Ghost. Kane's people are moving to the computer lab right now. All those brave students are ready to testify." He gestured to his last gunman. "Go. Make sure there are no witnesses." "Actually," James's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, "those witnesses are under new protection. You'd be surprised how many of your loyal soldiers switched sides once they learned the truth." "Got the final reports from the feds," Wheeler announced, entering with a thick folder. Kane's network went deep. 3 state governors, dozens of school boards, half the private security firms in the Southwest. They were building something bigger than we thought. Sarah studied the documents with professional interest. Military-grade enhancement drugs, combat training disguised as school security, GPS tracking through the delivery system. They weren't just creating soldiers, they were building an invisible army. Using kids because nobody looks too closely. At schools, James added, remembering his own methods from darker days. Hide in plain sight, shape them young, build loyalty through addiction and fear. Like you used to do. Maria Ramirez stood in the doorway, her nurse's uniform exchanged for federal witness protection gear. Her brother's testimony had put her at risk, but she'd refused to abandon her students. "Before you found a better way?" James met her eyes, steadily. "Yes, that's why I had to stop them." The door opened again, admitting Principal Hayes and Frank Morrison. The diner owner carried coffee for everyone. Real coffee, not the cheap staff room variety. Some conversations needed proper fuel. "Board of Education sending a special committee," Hayes reported, accepting his cup. "Full investigation into security contracts statewide. They're calling it the Ghostwriter reforms. New guidelines for school safety, student protection, oversight of private security firms." "Guess you're famous again," Wheeler smiled. "Just not the way you used to be." James watched through the glass as more students came forward to testify. Mike Thompson, still bearing bruises but standing tall. Lisa Chen, reading from the detailed diary she'd kept of changes in her brother's behavior. Even some of Tyler's former crew, choosing redemption over power. "Kane's trial starts next month," Sarah continued. "Federal prosecutors want you to testify, both about the school operation and about my own past," James finished. "Everything I did before, everyone I recruited, every young life I helped push down the wrong path. Could be dangerous," Wheeler warned. "A lot of old enemies might come looking." "Let them." James thought of his students, of their courage in facing their own demons. Some lessons are worth the risk. Frank refilled their cups, his weathered hands steady. School board's meeting tonight. Emergency session to discuss staff changes, security updates, and a certain history teacher's contract. They know everything now, Maria pointed out, about your past, your real identity. The parents, the community. They know what matters. Hayes straightened his own tie in unconscious mimicry of James's signature look. They know a man who chose to protect their children, who taught them about making better choices by example. The rest is just history, Sarah suggested with a small smile. Through the observation window, Marcus had finished his statement. The boy, no, the young man, spoke quietly with the federal agents, his posture showing none of the fear that had haunted him under Kane's influence. James remembered their first class together, discussing Civil War soldiers who'd found moral courage in impossible choices. There's more work to do, he said finally. Kane's operation went wide. Other schools, other students are at risk. Other ghosts that need exposing. Planning to ride again? Wheeler asked carefully. Not like before. James watched Lisa hug her brother, saw healing beginning where Kane had tried to create wounds. But maybe there's a way to be both. The teacher and the ghost. Show other schools how to spot the signs and how to protect their students. How to offer better choices. Sarah touched his arm gently. You don't have to do it alone this time. No, he agreed, thinking of all the allies he'd found in this unlikely battleground. I don't. His phone buzzed. A message from Tyler. Some of us want to start a student safety committee. Think you could advise? Got a lot to make up for. James smiled, seeing future lessons in the request. Second chances weren't just for old outlaws, it seemed. The board meeting starts in an hour, Hayes reminded them. They'll want answers about the future of Riverside East's security program. Then let's give them something better than Kane's vision, James said, straightening papers like the teacher he'd become. A program built on protection, not control. On choices, not fear. Wheeler checked his weapon out of habit. Might still be some of Kane's people out there, old ghosts looking for revenge. Good. James adjusted his glasses, no longer a prop, but not quite a disguise either. Let them come. Every ghost story needs a sequel. Outside the federal building, reporters waited with questions about the scandal, about the legendary outlaw who'd become a teacher to fight corruption, about the students who'd helped bring down a criminal empire. But James Morrison, teacher, protector, reformed ghost, had more important things to do. He had a board meeting to attend, students to support, and history lessons still to teach. Sometimes, the best way to exorcise old ghosts was to become a better one. 1 month after the shooting at Riverside East High School, James Morrison stood before his classroom again. The morning sun painted the desert campus in shades of gold and promise, so different from the shadows that had haunted these halls during Kane's reign. Students filtered in, some faces familiar, some new, all carrying the weight of recent history in their eyes. Welcome back, he said, no longer fumbling with his perpetually crooked tie. Today's lesson is about transformation, about how people, like nations, sometimes need to face their darkest chapters to find their way to light. Marcus Chen sat in the front row now, his former fear replaced with quiet confidence. Beside him, Tyler Wilson had traded his gang colors for a student government pin. In the back, Mike Thompson's bruises had faded, but the strength in his spine remained. Quite a change, Sarah observed from the doorway. She'd kept her counselor's position, but now she also headed the new student protection program. A month ago, half these kids were afraid to make eye contact. James smiled, remembering his own journey from shadow to light. Amazing what can happen when people get a real choice. The school had changed too. Kane's private security forces were gone, replaced by a community oversight committee led by Maria Ramirez. Frank Morrison's diner now had a satellite location in the cafeteria, serving as both coffee shop and informal safe house for students needing support. Even Principal Hayes carried himself differently, his administrative authority now tempered with genuine protective instinct. "Got the latest reports," Wheeler said, joining them between classes. The sheriff had become a regular presence on campus, building trust where Kane had sown fear. 3 more schools shut down similar operations this week. Your training programs? Making waves. James watched Lisa Chen helping a younger student with homework, remembering how she'd once watched her brother disappear into Kane's web. The Ghost Rider Educational Security Initiative. Still can't believe the board approved that name. Why not? Sarah's smile carried pride. You turned a legend of fear into something that protects people. That's worth remembering. Through his classroom window, James could see the spot where Tyler's crew used to terrorize younger students. Now it hosted peer support meetings, former gang members using their street smarts to spot signs of exploitation. Real strength, it turned out, came from lifting others up, not pushing them down. "Mr. Morrison?" Marcus approached his desk, carrying a familiar notebook. "I've been researching those resistance movements you taught us about. The ones where ordinary people stood up to protect their communities." James recognized his own teaching materials, now marked with new notes and insights. "Find any useful lessons?" "Yes, sir. About how change starts small. One person chooses differently, showing others it's possible." Marcus glanced at Tyler, who nodded encouragingly. "We want to start a mentoring program, help other schools, spot what we missed with Kane's operation. Building a new kind of network," Tyler added. "Not for control, but for protection." James studied his students, former victims and victimizers alike, now united in something stronger than fear. "You understand the risks?" Kane's organization went deep. There might be people who don't want these stories told. "That's why they need to be," Lisa joined them, her voice carrying the same quiet strength that had helped her brother break free. "You taught us that history repeats unless people learn from it." Sarah touched James's shoulder gently. "Looks like the Ghost Rider's legacy is evolving. Less about haunting the guilty, more about guiding the lost." "Speaking of guidance," Wheeler interrupted from the doorway. "Federal task force is here. They want to discuss expanding the program statewide. Something about a consulting position for a certain reformed outlaw." James straightened papers on his desk, no longer a nervous habit, but a teacher's ritual. "Tell them I'll meet them after class. Some lessons can't wait." The afternoon sun slanted through classroom windows as James began his lecture. On the surface, it was about Civil War turning points, about moments when ordinary people chose extraordinary courage. But beneath the history, his students recognized deeper truths about redemption, about how ghosts could become guardians. "Sir?" "Mike." Thompson raised his hand. "About what you said, transformation needs darkness first. Does that mean the hard parts are necessary to become better?" James thought of his own path, from outlaw to teacher, from shadow to light. Thought of Kane's operation exposed, of students finding strength in standing together, of a community healing through honest confrontation with its wounds. "The darkness shows us what needs changing," he answered carefully. "But the choice to change, to protect instead of prey, to teach instead of terrorize, that's where the real transformation happens." After class, he found Sarah waiting in the Outlaw parking lot. The federal task force could wait a few more minutes. Some partners deserve proper attention. "Ready to expand your legend?" she asked, falling into step beside him. "From Ghost Rider to Guardian Angel?" James adjusted his tie. Still crooked, but now it was part of a different kind of disguise. Not hiding weakness, but channeling strength into something constructive. Not my legend anymore. Look. Across the campus, students gathered in study groups and support circles. Former rivals shared resources instead of threats. Younger kids walked without fear, protected by reformed seniors who'd learned the true meaning of power. They're writing their own stories now, he said softly. Better ones than Kane could imagine. Better than I managed on my own. Wheeler's police cruiser pulled up, ready to escort them to the federal meeting. But James lingered, watching his students, his legacy, choose light over shadow, protection over power, community over control. You know, Sarah mused. Some people say Ghost Rider Morgan died in Tucson that night, that he vanished like smoke when the teacher James Morrison was born. Maybe. James smiled, thinking of all the lessons still to teach, all the students still to protect, all the darkness still needing light. Or maybe he just found a better way to ride. The desert wind carried echoes of old ghost stories as they drove away. But in the halls of Riverside East, new legends were already growing, stories of transformation, of redemption, of ordinary heroes who chose to stand against the darkness, and in every crooked time, every quiet lesson, every student choosing courage over fear, the ghost lived on, not as a shadow of vengeance, but as a guardian of better choices, a teacher of braver histories, a protector of futures yet to be written. The warning came on a Tuesday morning, 6 months after Kane's arrest. Emma Reeves, a sophomore at Riverside East, noticed something odd about the new college preparation supplements being marketed to honor students. The pills looked exactly like the performance enhancers Kane's people had pushed through the athletics program, just in different packaging. Instead of staying quiet, she did what the Ghost Rider Initiative had taught her. She took her concerns to Marcus Chen's Student Safety Committee. Within hours, the system James had helped build swung into action. Smart girl, Sarah said, reviewing Emma's report in James's classroom after hours. She recognized the chemical markers from the awareness training, even got photos of the distribution network, honor society members being approached at college fairs. James studied the evidence spread across his desk. They're adapting faster than we expected, using academic pressure instead of athletic ambition, targeting the kids who'd never touch street drugs, but would do anything for a competitive edge. Got the lab results back, Maria entered, still in her nurse's uniform. These study aids are Kane's formula, just refined. Less obvious physical enhancement, more focus on mental performance. They're marketing it as cognitive optimization. Through the window, James watched Tyler Wilson gathering his peer monitoring team. The former gang leader had developed an uncanny ability to spot exploitation patterns, using his street experience to protect rather than prey. 3 students already approached, Tyler reported when he joined them. All top-ranked juniors, all struggling with AP course loads. Recruiters are posing as college admissions consultants, offering pharmaceutical study support as part of their package. Clever, Wheeler added from the doorway. Private consultants don't need school board approval. They can operate completely outside the system we set up to catch Kane's people. James's phone buzzed, a message from Frank. 2 more schools reporting similar patterns. They're testing our blind spots. The kids spotted it first, Sarah noted with pride. The system works, but James recognized something in the distribution. Patton, a ghost from his own past. It's not just about selling drugs anymore. Look at the targeting. Class presidents, debate team captains, student government. They're building a different kind of network. Future leaders, Wheeler understood. Immediately. Get them hooked young, dependent on cognitive enhancement to maintain their edge. By the time they reach positions of power, they'll be owned, James finished. Just like Kane owned his athletic recruits. But these kids will go into law, politics, and corporate leadership. Maria examined the pills under a portable scanner. The addiction factor is subtle. Users develop psychological dependency more than physical. They'll think they can't succeed without the edge. The classroom door opened again, admitting Principal Hayes and Lisa Chen. The girl's face showed the same determination that had helped save her brother from Kane's operation. We found their local base, Lisa reported. Emma followed the college consultant to a private tutoring center downtown. It's registered to a company called Academic Advancement Solutions. Hayes handed over a file. Their CEO is Alexander Sterling, former pharmaceutical executive with ties to Kane's operation, James finished. He supplied the original formula. Now he's cutting out the middleman, going straight for the premium market. Sarah pulled up Sterling's photo on her tablet. Respected businessman, major donor to educational charities, even funds a scholarship program. Perfect cover, Wheeler growled. Who'd suspect a philanthropist of poisoning the same kids he's supposedly helping? James stood, decision made. We handle this carefully. Sterling's not Kane. He's smarter, more connected. One wrong move and he'll ghost the whole operation, set up somewhere else. Already on it, Tyler said from the door, his peer team behind him. We've got students documenting every interaction, building a pattern. Emma's working with other Honor Society members to map the recruitment approach. Maria's medical screening. Program caught 3 cases already, Lisa added. All willing to testify about how they were approached, what they were promised. James felt a familiar fire in his blood. The Ghost Rider's hunger for justice, tempered now by the teacher's understanding of consequences. Wheeler, can your people... Already coordinating with the DEA. Sterling's operation may be slick, but his product's still illegal. We just need to prove the connection. Sarah touched James's arm gently. The difference is this time we're not working from the shadows. The whole community's involved. Students, teachers, parents, all watching, all protecting. Through the classroom windows, James saw Emma Reeves meeting with other honor students, sharing what she'd learned about spotting exploitation. On the field, Tyler's team monitored sports practice, ensuring no new recruiters slipped through. In the library, Marcus led a study group teaching stress management techniques, healthy alternatives to chemical solutions. Sterling thinks he's found our weakness, James said finally. Using academic pressure instead of athletic ambition, targeting the achievers instead of the troubled kids. But he doesn't understand what's changed. The ghosts are working in the light now, Sarah smiled, and there's more of us than ever. James straightened his perpetually crooked tie, a gesture that had evolved from nervous habit to battle sign. Time to teach Mr. Sterling a lesson about underestimating students who've learned to protect their own. As they moved to implement their plan, James watched his legacy unfold across campus, not just in the safety protocols or security systems, but in the students themselves, former victims becoming protectors, would-be targets becoming guardians. The ghost still rode, but now he rode with an army of light behind him, and together they would ensure that no predator, no matter how sophisticated, could haunt these halls again. Sterling's operation fell apart faster than anyone expected, not because of federal raids or police stings, but because of a simple history presentation. Emma Reeves stood before the school board, delivering a carefully documented report about modern educational exploitation, learning from historical patterns. By her side stood Marcus Chen, Tyler Wilson, and 24 other students who'd been approached by Sterling's college consultants. James watched from the back of the room, pride mixing with fierce satisfaction as his students dismantled Sterling's entire operation piece by piece. They'd learned their lessons well, not just about history, but about how to change it. The psychological targeting is identical to methods used in the 1960s by corporate recruiting firms, Emma explained, her voice steady. They identify vulnerable high achievers, create artificial pressure, then offer chemical solutions disguised as support. Photographs and documents flashed across the screen. Sterling's consultants meeting students, detailed chemical analyses of the study aids, testimony from affected families. But most damning were the financial records Lisa Chen had uncovered, showing Sterling's connections to Kane's original operation. "We found this pattern because we were taught to look for it," Marcus added, gesturing to James. "Because someone showed us that standing up isn't just about fighting back. It's about protecting others from falling into the same traps." In the audience, Alexander Sterling's face remained professionally neutral. But James recognized the look in his eyes. It was the same desperate calculation he'd seen in Kane's during the library shootout, a predator realizing his hunting grounds had become a trap. "This is absurd," Sterling stood, every inch the respected businessman. "These wild accusations from teenagers about legitimate college preparation services are supported by federal evidence," Wheeler cut in, producing his badge. DEA agents moved to block the exits, including testimony from your former partner, Victor Kane. He's been quite cooperative since the Ghostwriter Initiative started dismantling his network. Sterling's mask cracked slightly. Ghostwriter? That old fairy tale about some outlaw who haunted the border? What does that have to do with teaching kids to spot predators? James stepped forward, letting his teacher's demeanor fall away just enough to make Sterling flinch. Everything. Sometimes the best way to fight monsters is to show others how to recognize them. The arrest was almost anticlimactic. As federal agents led Sterling away, James watched his students, past and present, victims and protectors, supporting each other with quiet strength. Emma hugged her parents, no longer afraid of academic pressure. Tyler's crew, now a legitimate student safety team, coordinated with Wheeler's deputies to secure evidence. "You know what the best part is?" Sarah joined him, pride evident in her voice. "They don't need us anymore. Not really. They've learned to protect themselves." Through the boardroom windows, James could see Riverside East bathed in afternoon light. No more shadows lurked in its corners. No more predators stalked its halls. The school had become what he'd always hoped, a place of real learning, where students grew stronger by lifting each other up. "Mr. Morrison?" Lisa approached, carrying a familiar leather-bound book. "We found something in Sterling's files. It's about your old operations, before you became a teacher." James accepted the book, recognizing his own handwriting from darker days. Lists of recruitment tactics, psychological pressure points, ways to identify vulnerable targets. Everything he'd once used to hurt now served as a manual for protection. "We want to expand the program," Marcus said, joining them. "Not just to other schools, but into colleges, workplaces, anywhere people might be vulnerable to exploitation." "The ghost rides on," Maria added softly. "But now he has an army of light behind him." James studied his former ledger of shadows, then looked at the students who'd turned its darkness into illumination. "No," he said finally, "not the ghost, something better." That evening, he sat in Frank's diner, grading papers, while Sarah reviewed plans for the program's expansion. Wheeler had brought reports from other districts adopting the initiative, showing dramatic drops in student exploitation rates. "Got something for you," Frank announced, bringing coffee and an old newspaper. The headline showed James's own face. From years ago, a wanted poster for the notorious Ghost Rider. Below it, a newer clipping about the teacher who'd helped students bring down 2 criminal empires. "Quite a change," Sarah observed. "From most wanted to most valued." James touched the photos, feeling the weight of transformation. "The real change is them," he nodded toward the window, where Emma and her friends were setting up a peer support meeting in the diner's back room. "They took everything Kane and Sterling tried to use against them and turned it into strength." His phone buzzed. A message from Tyler. "New Student Safety Committee starting at Central High. They're asking for training." Ready to teach some more ghost stories? Through the diner's window, the setting sun painted Riverside East in colors of promise. Students crossed the campus without fear, their steps sure, their spirits unbound. In the distance, desert winds still carried echoes of old ghost stories, but now they were stories of protection, not predation. Of redemption, not revenge. "You know," Wheeler said, joining them with his own coffee, "there's talk of making the initiative federal policy, standard training for all schools. They're calling it the Guardian program now, not Ghost Rider. Times change. People change," James corrected, thinking of his own journey from shadow to light. "If they're given the chance, the support, the choice." He straightened his eternally crooked tie, no longer a disguise or a symbol, just part of who he'd become. Outside, a new generation of guardians was rising, armed with knowledge and courage instead of fear and violence. They would face their own battles, their own demons, but they would face them together. The ghost still rode through desert nights, but now he rode as a teacher, not a terror. And in every classroom where students learn to protect each other, in every hallway where light drives out darkness, in every young heart that chooses courage over fear, his legacy lived on. Not as a legend of vengeance, but as a lesson in transformation. Not as a story of haunting, but as a promise of hope. The bell above Frank's door chimed as more students arrived for the support meeting. James gathered his papers, ready to teach one more lesson about history and choices, and the endless possibility of change. After all, every ghost story had to end sometime. But the real story, the story of light defeating darkness, of students becoming guardians, of love proving stronger than fear, that story was just beginning, and James Morrison, once the most feared outlaw in 3 states, now the most devoted teacher in any state, was ready to help write its next chapter. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.